Hare Krishna. So welcome to our evening seminar. This seminar is titled The Early Days of ISKCON. Actually, the original idea I had was just a session on the glorification of Srila Prabhupada, because Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja is coming up and it's a good opportunity for us to meditate on the wonderful, glorious qualities of His divine grace. And also inspire everyone to write an offering for Srila Prabhupada on his Vyasa Puja day. Something small, something big, whatever you can. Something as an offering of gratitude for what Srila Prabhupada had given. So I thought, rather than speaking about different pastimes of Srila Prabhupada in different places, I thought I'd just focus and narrow it on ISKCON's early days, just to give us an idea of how much Prabhupada endeavored to start ISKCON, and how much what Prabhupada went through when starting ISKCON in 26 2nd Avenue in New York. So this session will be more based on that period of time, and the next week's session, which is on Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja day, I thought we could talk about more pastimes of Srila Prabhupada throughout his manifest Leela in this world. So before we begin, take the blessings of all the devotees and the previous acharyas to be able to glorify the wonderful transcendental activities of Srila Prabhupada, one of the most dear servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. Om Jnanatimrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Okay, so just a quick a quick summary of the pastime of Srila Prabhupada since his appearance in the world. Most of this material is taken from Satsvarup Das Goswami Maharaj in his Your Ever Well-Wisher and his Prabhupada Lilamrita. So, as we know, Prabhupada had taken birth or had appeared in this world the day after Janmashtami. So that's Nandotsava, or the festival in which Nanda Maharaj held, because Krishna was born the previous night at midnight. So the next day, when Nanda Maharaj and all the residents of Braja had woken up, then they had found that Mother Yashoda had given birth to baby Krishna. So then they celebrated, and it's mentioned how Nanda Maharaj offered so much charity, had a great festival. Everyone in the village came and saw Bal Krishna, and they had a great festival in that way. So Prabhupada appeared on that day. I remember hearing that one of Prabhupada's disciples actually mentioned a very interesting realization, that I think it was you, Prabhu, we were mentioning in the Prabhupada Leela website. They were mentioning how when the Guru Puja began and they were glorifying Prabhupada by chanting, by singing the Guru Puja, as soon as the Guru Puja would finish, then one particular disciple of Srila Prabhupada began to chant Hare Krishna, and they began the kirtan that way. And Prabhupada appreciated that. And so Prabhupada then instituted that. It became a common thing throughout all the morning program. And the mood Prabhupada had was at that time was the Guru Puja wasn't being offered to him, it was being offered to his spiritual master. And more importantly, he made sure that the Hare Krishna mantra happened after, because he wanted everyone to know and glorify Krishna and not himself. So that same disciple was mentioning, or another disciple's realization was that Prabhupada appeared on the day after Janmashtami because he wanted Krishna's glories to be sung, not his own. So it's a nice meditation to have about Srila Prabhupada, and more importantly, it's very beneficial for us in one sense, or rather very attractive for us, because we get to have the double celebration. We get to have a double festivity to be able to glorify Gopinath and his appearance, and also how he had sent one of his personal parshad, or one of his personal associates. So it gives us a great opportunity to have a great festivity and glorify both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His most dear servant. So Prabhupada's early days, you can understand in one sense, is the early days of ISKCON. Although I'm focusing more on the New York Pastimes, the early matchless gift storefront. Prabhupada's whole lifetime, there's a nice video or a nice couple of documentaries called Your Ever Well-Wisher, and there it's mentioned, one of the first titles is A Lifetime in Preparation. So this whole period of time Prabhupada had, we see in India, before starting ISKCON in the West, we can understand Prabhupada wasn't idle one bit. Prabhupada says there was never a moment that I did not remember Krishna. So Prabhupada was always Krishna conscious, and Prabhupada's endeavors to serve Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was obvious throughout this period of time. But Prabhupada himself mentions that his idea was to do it as a rich man, to get enough, make the business, get enough money and go to the West. But him and Krishna had an argument, and Krishna wanted him to do it as a poor man. And eventually Krishna won. If Krishna wants, he'll win. So then Prabhupada left India at the age of 69 or 68. He celebrated his 69th birthday on the ship, the Jaladuta. But we often talk about how Prabhupada went with just clothes and not much money. But we also need to understand that Prabhupada went with his Bhagavatam. Prabhupada had his Bhagavatam shipped from Bombay all the way to Cochin, and Prabhupada took the Jaladuta from the other side, from Kolkata, and from Kolkata then he went from Kolkata then he went down to Cochin, where they loaded his books, and from there he traversed across the ocean to reach Boston Harbor. So we can understand Prabhupada took not just money and his clothes and the Acharya's commentary and things like that. No, Prabhupada also took his books. He took Srimad Bhagavatam especially. And in that section, I think it's in Ever Well-Wisher, it's mentioned that that's what gave Prabhupada the greatest amount of inspiration to continue. It's mentioned that he suffered so much on the trip on the way from India all the way to Boston, to America, that he suffered from 2 heart attacks, and he also suffered from sickness. And if you read his diaries, actually this is the period of time, today is the 25th? Yeah, so 25th of August in 1969, or rather 65, it's mentioned that Prabhupada's entry on that day was that he had suffered a heart attack. He had suffered that heart attack, and for the next 3-4 days there was no entry because he was simply in pain. So this is the period of time we can, I guess, according to the Western calendar, of course not according to the Tithi, but we can meditate on Prabhupada's traveling to the West and how Prabhupada sacrificed so much to come to the West. You see, there's this verse that when Prabhupada went to Boston, he wrote the Makine Bhagavad Dharma, and I'll touch on that poem at the end of this session today. But when he reached Butler, there Satsvarupa Goswami Maharaj, he puts a nice verse that Prahlad Maharaj praise or glorifies Nrsingadev with. And he mentions that when Prabhupada reached Butler, Prabhupada got a glimpse at the fallen condition of the Western countries. That he had come to give Bhagavad Dharma, and the very things that he was coming to give, that the culture and the the nature of the people there was completely opposite or against it. Not only was it opposite, but they were against it. It was like Jagai and Madai. Jagai and Madai would purposely look through the Vedas and all the different scriptures and perform the sinful activities purposely, so that they would go against it. So the same way in the people of America, and of course the rest of the Western world, what to speak, there's no any distinction nowadays. Everyone was simply against the 4 basic principles of human life. No meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling, no intoxication. Everyone was simply absorbed in eating, sleeping, mating and defending. And what to speak of God consciousness. It was just hedonism, or as they call it nowadays, capitalism. So Prabhupada saw this degraded condition of the Americans, and Satsvarupa Goswami mentions this, and this is probably going to be the main theme of today's session, this mood, this glorious quality of Srila Prabhupada. That Prahlad Maharaj tells Nrsingadev that I see that there are many saintly persons, indeed, but they are they are interested only in their own deliverance. Not caring for the big cities and towns, they go to the Himalayas or the forests to meditate with vows of silence. They are not interested in delivering others. As for me, however, I do not wish to be liberated alone, leaving aside all these poor fools and rascals. I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to the shelter at your lotus feet. So Prabhupada's mood was very much focused on that. Because Prabhupada could have just stayed in Vrindavan. Prabhupada could have just written his books and he could have just sent them out to different places around the world. But Prabhupada's mood was Vavasayatmika Buddhi Ekeha Kurunandana. That his focus was just following the orders of the spiritual master single-pointedly. And his spiritual master had told him two things. One, if you have money, print books. And the second is that you are an English-speaking person. Why don't you go to the West and preach this novel message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? So Prabhupada did that, and Prabhupada kept that. He said, not once did I forget the orders of my spiritual master. And therefore, as you read in the end of CC, Prabhupada writes there, after finishing writing the whole CC, he writes there that I was never separated from my spiritual master. Because I was always with my spiritual master, and the whole Guru Parampara, because Prabhupada's mood was like this, to preach Krishna consciousness, which was handed down to him through the Guru Parampara. It's our family business. So in Butler, he met Gopal and Sally Agarwal. And Gopal's father, somehow or other, when Prabhupada met him as a sannyasi in India, he was just saying, I need to go to the West, I need to do this, I need to do that. He's just a chance acquaintance. And he said, okay, I'll arrange that. My son lives in Boston in USA. I'll arrange it. And Prabhupada just thought, oh, this is another passing thing. Because, someone will say, yeah, I'll help you out, just to keep you, pacify you, anything. But then, to Prabhupada's surprise, Prabhupada received the P form and all these other forms that gave him or granted him the opportunity to enter into the USA. So then Gopal and Sali thought that he wouldn't come. And Prabhupada had sent them a letter with a picture of himself. And when Prabhupada actually did come and rock up to the bus terminal, they were shocked because Prabhupada had actually come. And they were thinking, how do we take care of him? We've already established ourselves as a nice family within this community. And maybe he's just come here to finance his Bhagavatam. He's probably not here to preach anyway. He just wants to finance his books so that he can print them and distribute them. But Prabhupada didn't just do that. Prabhupada chanted there. Whatever happened throughout the house, if Sally talked to him, didn't talk to him, Prabhupada chanted. And she appreciated that. She said that he was the most amiable guest, the most easygoing guest that they had ever had. And so Prabhupada had different pastimes there, like he would cook lunch for himself, and then over a period of time he ended up cooking for the whole family. The daughter, she would go to Sunday school, and whenever she came back, she started calling Prabhupada Swami Jesus. And then Prabhupada eventually at one stage says, and then the child would lead them all. So it's a very prophetic way of saying that everyone would recognize Prabhupada as a servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So anyway, on October 18th in 1969, Prabhupada left Butler, Pennsylvania and went to New York. There he met Ramamurti Mishra. So we all know Ramamurti Mishra, Dr. Mishra. He's a Mayavadi. He was propounding this impersonal philosophy to the extent of calling himself God and everyone else God. And Prabhupada actually, he made acquaintance with him and lived with him and cared for him so well that Dr. Mishra only remembers that about Prabhupada. Despite them having so many arguments and Prabhupada's heavy refusal of his philosophy, Dr. Mishra would always remember Prabhupada's care. He said that I was so sickly that I was supposed to die, but by serving me and cooking for me and taking care of me, Swamiji, he saved me. So Prabhupada's mood was that he was always against Mayavad philosophy. He never compromised anything. In fact, one particular sannyasi from a particular mission there, he told Prabhupada that Swamiji, you should give up this saffron robes and you should take this coat and suit and you should relax on your regulations and you should take to drinking alcohol and meat. That's the only way you can survive in this weather, and that's the only way you can make contacts here. And so of course Prabhupada vehemently was against that, and Prabhupada just did what was the standard way of doing things. He did not compromise. He gave Krishna consciousness as it was, or as it is rather. Now, here, Prabhupada, he lectured there. Although they had such a nice sort of gentlemanly relationship, Prabhupada could not tolerate him, and neither could Dr. Mishra tolerate Prabhupada going against his philosophy, so he moved him to a different place. Prabhupada, for 1 year, had to manage himself, paying his own rent, food and everything, by himself. He could not rely on anyone. And it's mentioned that Prabhupada said this was the most loneliest time. And Prabhupada would often go to the pier in Boston and think about when to go back. When is the next boat out of here? And it's mentioned that at a particular point in time, he met a Mr. Reuben while sitting in a park bench. And he was explaining to Mr. Reuben, I am not a poor man, I am rich. There are temples and books, they are existing, they are there, but the time is separating us from them. And this Mr. Reuben was telling or explaining that he would never speak in the singular as I, me, my. He would always speak in sort of the plural, we, us, as if referring to someone else as well. So you can understand Prabhupada always was very fixed that his spiritual master and the Guru Parampara and Krishna was with him. So unfortunately at that period of time, Prabhupada had a typewriter and a tape recorder which was stolen, and Prabhupada knew it was the janitor of that place. He had broken in and done it. But then Prabhupada moved to the Bowery after that. A couple of his acquaintances there, I think his name is Harvey Cohen, Harvey. He took Prabhupada from that place uptown all the way downtown to the Bowery, the lowest district, pretty much the district where all the bums and the derelicts, those who were drunk, those who were high on drugs, they lived. And he lived in Harvey's loft along with a person called David Allen. And as we know, the pastime Prabhupada, this is the original loft program, this is the original preaching outreach Western program that we often hear about. That Prabhupada would do cooking classes, Prabhupada would have Sanskrit class, and Prabhupada would have personal darshans. And Prabhupada would do kirtan and lecturing. And because he was always there, it was like a pad for so many people to always come and meet him and associate with him, and they would all jam together with Prabhupada, and there's like a new high or something like that for them. But then unfortunately, this David, he flipped out one day, he went mad. And Prabhupada very dramatically left that place, and as he left that place, then he spent one full week in a place, I think it's Carl Jaeger's his place. And during that period of time he met Michael Grant or Mukunda Maharaj, and Mukunda Maharaj and the rest of the devotees or rest of the people there, they found the storefront, 26 2nd Avenue. Now I'm just fast forwarding a bit so that we can actually go to the beginning of the ISKCON days. Prabhupada, he was extremely vigilant. Like Prabhupada, he was always sharp. No matter what happened, he was always very sharp in intelligence, and he was very, very particular in how to engage everything in Krishna's service. So Prabhupada, it's mentioned that the storefront cost him $125 a month, and his little room that's on the building just behind the storefront, it cost him $71 a month. So in total $196 a month. So then Prabhupada was thinking, he asked everyone to chip in, and they all chipped in to help the Swami, because he seems to be quite cool and things like that, and he has a message, and so they felt obliged to help the Swami. But the interesting thing here that Satsvarupa Goswami mentions is that Prabhupada's never forgot his mission, and he took every opportunity to carry out that mission. So there was this Mr. Gardiner who actually owned the place, and it's quite interesting, a bit funny also, that Prabhupada thought, I'm going to make him a trustee. So Prabhupada sold him a Bhagavatam set. Prabhupada signed it to him and gave it to him right there. And it's mentioned that this Mr. Gardiner, he felt very flattered and honored that he said, yeah, I'll definitely become your trustee of your spiritual movement. And he agreed to pay $20 a month. So Prabhupada was very, very present, very, very conscious of the moment, and conscious of how to engage that moment in Krishna's service. That he did, not only did he engaged that person, he gave them Srimad Bhagavatam, and at the same time he made them engaged in Krishna consciousness, in the service of the Lord constantly or consistently, regularly, by making him pay some of his money for the propaganda or the preaching movement. So this point ISKCON was yet to be established legally. So it's mentioned how Prabhupada's friends and Prabhupada's well-wishers, then they took Prabhupada's belongings and they started walking up many blocks towards the storefront in 26 2nd Avenue. And quite interestingly, that storefront was originally called the Matchless Gifts, and it was like a simple sort of how to say it, a gift shop. And it so happened at that particular point in time there were like small collector's edition matchboxes there, so therefore it's called the Matchless Gift. So one important thing to think about here is that we often hear of how Prabhupada, he reached the West, and at that particular point in time the hippie movement happened and it just worked out for Prabhupada. But we should be careful not to diminish or to reduce the glories of Srila Prabhupada, because it is not that the situation was very conducive for Prabhupada that he was successful, right? It's actually simply that he carried out Krishna's will and Krishna used him as an instrument. And the fact that Krishna chose to use him as an instrument is Prabhupada's glories, because Prabhupada was so pure that Krishna decided to use Srila Prabhupada to preach Krishna consciousness to the Western world. So here it's mentioned here that Bhaktivedanta Swami had not made a study of the youth movement in America before moving to the Lower East Side. He had never even made specific plans to come here amid so many young people. But in the 10 months since Calcutta, he had been moved by the force of circumstance, or as he understood it, by Krishna's will, from one place to another. He was fixed in the order of his spiritual master and the Vedic view, a view that wasn't going to be influenced by the radical changes of the 1960s. If it so happened that these young people, because of some change in the American cultural climate, were to prove more receptive to him, then that would be welcome. And that would also be Krishna's will. So we should understand it's not that Prabhupada had it easy, as we'll understand here. So, Prabhupada just happened to come to America at the right time to preach to all these disillusioned youth, and we don't want to take away the credit Prabhupada had, because Prabhupada did walk through fire. Prabhupada mentions in the first couple of years of establishing ISKCON, he mentions that he literally walked through fire to establish this whole ISKCON movement. And you can take it literally, he did. He had to walk to literally fire, which means that he struggled so hard. He engaged his energy so much just to simply establish this ISKCON movement. And we'll see the type of people he met and the different interactions he had in this early days of ISKCON. Because this should give us the impetus, the enthusiasm to also go out and preach Krishna consciousness. Because sometimes in our devotional service, when we practice Krishna consciousness, we may lose enthusiasm, we may lose the steam, we may become a bit doubtful of what we're doing. And it's this period of time, it is always very necessary to come back to the very basic point of why we're here in Krishna consciousness. We're here because of Srila Prabhupada's endeavors to give us Krishna consciousness. And now that we have Krishna consciousness, our goal, our mission is just to simply repay our debt to Srila Prabhupada, which is not completely payable. We cannot completely repay our spiritual master, but we can endeavor to show our gratitude and love by carrying out their instructions. So it's always good to go back to read about Srila Prabhupada's pastimes, the pastimes of the previous acharyas. It'll give us inspiration and enthusiasm to continue going on in devotional service, because we can see by example what we need to do. And then by seeing the example of what we need to do, then we can actually carry it out with full confidence and faith in the Lord. Now, for Srila Prabhupada, as we can see here, he preached Krishna consciousness single-handedly. No one helped him. Despite his, it's mentioned he cried in the wilderness. Imagine you going into a forest, no one is there, and you're crying out for help. Like that, Prabhupada was crying out in America for help. He was asking so many of his god brothers. He was asking the Srimati Sumati Murarji for help. He was asking so many wealthy businessmen in India for help financially, physically. No one responded. If they responded, they would respond saying that it's not possible, we cannot send, we're not in a position to send. All of these things. In fact, Prabhupada was so desperate to start and carry out the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He said that, you bring people here, you make them in charge, I'll simply follow them, I will assist them. Just send people here, we need to do something here, it's such a great opportunity. But all of these desires, all of these requests fell on deaf ears. So Prabhupada just simply took it up himself and did it. So Gopinath arranged it in such a way that this is all the glories of Srila Prabhupada. All his endeavors are his credit. So here, this is the most important point, and I'll link it back to this point of how it's not just because of the climatic situation that Prabhupada was successful. Rather, we go back many years to when Prabhupada met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur for the first time. When Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was preaching, Prabhupada questioned him, but how will the people listen if the country itself is under the control of another country? How will people listen to this message? And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that this message is not dependent on so-called independence of a particular country. This is the need of the soul, this is the need of the hour. And here Satsvarupa Goswami mentions the same thing. Actually, because of the omnious influence of the Kali millennium, this was historically the worst of times for spiritual cultivation, hippie revolution or not. So overall, the whole situation is not meant for spiritual realization. In fact, this whole age of Kali, technically we're not supposed to become self-realized or understand anything about self-realization. That's how bad it is. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy is that we're able to practice some spiritual consciousness, some Krishna conscious activities by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates. Okay, so Prabhupada now he's in the storefront in 26 2nd Avenue, and Prabhupada one day he goes for a japa walk in his dhoti kurta and a jumper and his cane. And there he meets one Howard Wheeler, who's later known as Hayagriva Prabhu. And he meets him while walking. And it is mentioned that, I'll mention it as Howard at this point in time, they haven't been initiated yet. Howard and his friends, Wally, Keith, and Chuck, who regularly visited their home, they had gone to India in search of guru and understanding spirituality. So when he met Prabhupada, he was completely shocked. Because it's mentioned that he was just, crossing, because when you cross the Bowery, what do you cross in the Bowery? You cross drunkards and people, acid heads, and all these people who are completely off their mind, staggering, unconscious, all of these people who are completely not present at all. They're not conscious and they're not sane. And suddenly he meets one effulgent sannyasi coming from India walking down the street in the US of A, of all places. So then it's mentioned that when he came down, he looked like a genie that popped out of Aladdin's lamp. It was completely unheard of, completely inconceivable to see such a person in the middle of America. So this Howard Wheeler then approached Prabhupada and asked him, "Are you from India?" And Prabhupada smiled and said, "Oh yes, and you?" And Howard says, I told him no, but that I had just returned from India and was very interested in his country and the Hindu philosophy. And just by this, Prabhupada had a very nice conversation, and he invited Howard and his friends to come and visit for the Bhagavad Gita classes. Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita classes were Monday, Wednesday and Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. He would have half an hour kirtan before and half an hour kirtan after. And his class would go from 6:30 to 8:30 with questions and everything in between. So Prabhupada would also serve some fruit as prasad. So the youth were open for all of these things. Like it's mentioned here that when the kirtan suddenly sprang up from the Swami's cymbals and sonorous voice, they immediately felt that it was going to be something far out. Here was another chance to trip out, and willingly they began to flow with it. They would surrender their minds and explore the limits of chanting for all it was worth. So for all these followers of Swamiji at that time, their mood and consciousness was Let's try anything and everything and see where we go. And Prabhupada's mood was to give them the best, to give them Krishna consciousness and not consider where they came from. As Rupa Goswami prays, he prays to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratushe Namaha. That Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the most munificent incarnation of the Lord. Why? When we go and when we see how Mahaprabhu embraces King Maharaj Prataparudra, and he embraces Maharaj Prataparudra after Maharaj Prataparudra sang the Gopi Geet. And it's mentioned that Mahaprabhu embraced him and said that I don't know who you are, I don't know where you're from, but I'm completely indebted to you for making me remember Krishna. And there Prabhupada writes in the purport that this is what Srila Rupa Goswami was writing when he wrote Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate, that Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave Krishna consciousness without any consideration of where these people came from, what their background was and who they were. He just simply liberally gave Krishna consciousness to others, and Prabhupada's mood was like that. That he just simply gave Krishna consciousness to anyone and everyone that came forward. So during his first lectures, Prabhupada was very, this is the situation. Prabhupada, when he's giving the class, as soon as he finished the kirtan and he began the class, some people would have just walked up in the middle of, stood up in the middle of kirtan and just walked out. As soon as he began class, some people would have just stood up, made noise and left. Outside there's so much car noise happening, there's dogs barking, there's kids running around, there's a guy yelling from the top of this house, hey, get out of here, and there's just so much noise and ruckus. But Prabhupada just simply sat there with the front door open, inviting people to come in, and he just simply gave his class on Bhagavad Gita. One particular point in time, Prabhupada was giving an example of how devotional service is dormant within the heart and it just needs to be revived. The service propensity is there within the heart, but unfortunately we are using that service propensity for so many unnecessary things rather than engaging in Krishna's service. And while Prabhupada was explaining like this, then suddenly what happened was that Prabhupada explains that by this service attitude anyone can serve Krishna consciousness. It doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter where you've come from, just engage in devotional service. So Prabhupada is saying here, so it doesn't matter what a person was doing before, what sinful activities. A person may not be perfect at first, but if he's engaged in the service, then he will be purified. And immediately as he finished speaking that, one Bowery derelict or a bum or a homeless person, someone who was drunk, came in whistling and shouting. And everyone was shocked, they didn't know what to do. And the drunk was, I'll read what he says. The drunk says, how are ya? I'll be right back. I brought another thing. And Bhaktivedanta Swami, don't disturb, sit down. We are talking seriously. The drunk, I'll put it up there. In a church? Alright, I'll be back. So this white-haired man with a grizzly beard, he just walked into the temple and just walks out. And Prabhupada starts laughing. And then he returns to his lecture. So this is the situation where Prabhupada is preaching. We will never be able to come into that situation. Prabhupada established Krishna consciousness. Everything is made easy by Prabhupada for us. We just simply have to take the books out, give them to people, encourage them to read, preach Krishna consciousness, give them the holy name, give them prasadam, engage them in Krishna consciousness. Everything's been there, we just have to deliver it. Prabhupada has established everything for us. So we should show our gratitude and be humble and grateful before His divine grace and beg to be able to be engaged in His service to His spiritual master. So then after 5 minutes, this old bum suddenly appears and he goes, how are ya? And he starts running in. And as he runs in through the group, he starts going all the way to the back. The storefront is empty. It's just one naked bulb hanging from the wall. Prabhupada sitting on a flat mat in the back center of the room, and everyone's sitting in the front on a plastic straw mat. And in the back corner, there is a door to the bathroom, and there's a sink just outside. And to the back, there's an entry to go out into the courtyard, and to the left, there's a door which Prabhupada takes to go through the courtyard upstairs to his room. So Prabhupada's facing this way. Prabhupada's facing sort of towards the glass front door, glass window that says matchless gift, and behind him is the exit and the bathroom. So suddenly this bum, he just comes through all the crowd and he just goes straight behind Srila Prabhupada. And he tells He just opens the toilet room door, puts 2 rolls of bathroom tissue inside, closes the door, turns to the sink, sits some paper towels on top of it, puts 2 more rolls of bathroom tissue and some more paper under the sink. He stands, turns around to the Swami and the audience, and then Prabhupada says, "What is this?" And then the bum is silent. He has done his work. And Swami begins to laugh, thanking his visitor, who is now moving towards the door. Thank you very much." The bum exits. "Just see," Bhaktivedanta Swami now addresses his congregation, "it is a natural tendency to give some service. Just see, he is not in order, but he thought that here is something, let me give some service. Just see how automatically it comes. This is natural." So Prabhupada's teaching, but in order to teach we have to understand that this is something that's very deeply ingrained in Prabhupada's consciousness, that he's simply here to engage everyone in Krishna's service. He recognized that and gave credit to that drunkard for that. But here's the next thing. The young men in the audience look at one another. This is really far out. First the chanting with the brass cymbals, the Swami looking like Buddha and talking about Krishna and chanting, now this crazy stuff with the bum. But the Swami stays cool. He's really cool. Just sitting on the floor like he's not afraid of anything. Just talking his philosophy about the soul and us becoming saints, and even the old drunk becoming a saint. So Prabhupada's mood was like that. He gave Krishna consciousness very liberally. So fast forwarding, Prabhupada then establishes ISKCON. And this particular book, you ever well wish, it doesn't give so much detail about it. But in Prabhupada Lilamrita, it's mentioned how one day Prabhupada, he came across Mr. Goldsmith, a lawyer, and he wanted to establish ISKCON. So he said, "We shall call our society ISKCON." And someone asked him, "Well, why don't you call it God consciousness?" And Prabhupada says, God is a vague word. Krishna consciousness, that is direct. In fact, this word Krishna consciousness, it's Prabhupada's rendering of the phrase from Rupa Goswami's Padyavalari. And the words Rupa Goswami use is Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita, to be absorbed in the mellow taste of executing devotional service to Krishna. In short, Krishna consciousness. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita. So here Prabhupada establishes, he makes the 7 purposes of ISKCON. And what happened was that when he gave a lecture that night, then he told, Mr. Goldsmith has something to say. And then the lawyer, Mr. Goldsmith, got up and he said that he brought out the paperwork. And then Prabhupada said, yes, okay, come forward. Okay, so all you boys, you come forward and sign this paperwork. Okay, you, Mr. Green, you, Michael, Mr. Grant, Mr. Michael, Mr. Howard, you come forward and you write. And in total, I think he got around 9 or 12 people to come forward and sign this paperwork to incorporate ISKCON as a legal entity that was able to accept donations. So Prabhupada wasn't some sentimental person that, I'll just go to America and chant and it'll just come. Prabhupada is very, very, very particular that this has to be done. I need to establish it so that the Lakshmi will come like this. Then I can engage the Lakshmi like this according to the rules of this particular country. So then it will be used properly in Krishna's service, and there's no risk that this money will be taken away from Krishna's service. So Prabhupada was very particular in the way he performed Krishna consciousness. And that was the expression of his love for Krishna. He wasn't just an airy-fairy person. He was very, very particular. He was very, very conscious of what he was doing. In fact, Prabhupada mentions that the devotees of Krishna consciousness, we are successful in our preaching movement, is successful in everything because we do not accept a single farthing from ourselves. We use every single thing for Krishna. Every single cent, paisa is used for Krishna's service. Nothing more, nothing less. Otherwise, why are they following me? I'm not giving them money. But they're following because they're engaging in Krishna service, and that is giving them the highest bliss. So Prabhupada was very particular there. And all these boys, they're like 26, early 20s, late 20s. And you know what they did? They thought, who can be bothered going through these 12 pages of document? This Swami just we're just helping this Swami set up an institution. Okay, fine, we'll just sign it. And they just signed it with faith in Prabhupada. They didn't even look at what they were signing. And actually what they had written or signed was that each of them would take a term. I think it was 3 months or 2 months. That 3 of them would be trustees, and the next month or the next 2 months, the next 3 would be trustees, and the next month, the next 2 would be trustees. Like that. They would rotate in that way. Anyway, so then Prabhupada, he established ISKCON in that way. And when, at one particular point in time, when Prabhupada, after establishing legally ISKCON, then suddenly after repeated association with Srila Prabhupada, Howard, Keith and Wally, they suddenly decided that, yeah, actually this place is quite bare. We should decorate this place. And their consciousness or their minds were so purified that they decided to decorate in such a way that would please Prabhupada, taking all their stuff they had taken from India. To the extent that, if you think about it, if you're such a person who just came to a program and you don't have any sort of background knowledge of how to treat a saintly person, you wouldn't even think about setting up an elevated seating position for that person. You wouldn't think about so much decorating the place. But they were thinking of these things. For them, they brought down so many things. Curtains, they built a little stage or platform for Prabhupada to sit on and lecture from. They covered that platform with something comfortable and put cushions there for Prabhupada to sit on. They even put pictures that they had got from India all over the place. They got a picture of some funny looking cat, a person with 6 arms, and different things like that. So then they put their pictures in tapestries, they set up incense burners and other paraphernalia. And when Prabhupada came, Prabhupada was so happy. Prabhupada, when he came in for the kirtan, he looked at everything, he raised his eyebrows in satisfaction. You are all advancing. And then he looked around and he smiled very broadly and said, yes, this is Krishna consciousness. But then as soon as Prabhupada did that, his sudden happy mood seemed almost like a reward for their earnest labors. So this is the beginning of them accepting Prabhupada as a spiritual master, as their guide. It's very interesting, this section. After New York is established, then he goes to San Francisco. And then when he travels back from San Francisco to New York, what happens is that Prabhupada again goes through a heart attack and there's so many difficult situations there. And then Prabhupada goes to Long Beach, and from Long Beach he goes back to India for recovery. When Prabhupada comes back from India, Prabhupada's mood up until then was that of a close friend, a guide, someone that they could, follow to a certain extent and things like that. But when Prabhupada came back from India, Prabhupada's mood was that of an acharya. Prabhupada's very, very particular. And everyone felt that shift in Prabhupada. Prabhupada became more grave. It's not that he didn't lose his friendliness, but Prabhupada became more grave, so that they wouldn't treat him so cheaply. They would show him the due respect so that they wouldn't offend him in any way. So that's later on. But now Prabhupada here, it's mentioned that he sat with them and ate with them like a friend, as if he was their friend. So anyway, here Prabhupada, he was so happy, but then he became immediately grave. And all these boys felt like, so small. They felt so foolish for feeling so happy. And as soon as Prabhupada picked up kartals and opened his eyes, he looked at them and smiled, and they felt happy again. So, kind of like, when you feel the sun's rays and suddenly the cloud comes, and you feel that sort of sudden shock of disappearance of heat, and suddenly the sun comes back again. It was like that for them. And you can understand that, he picked up kartals and again smiled a ray of appreciation, and their hearts beamed back. So they started developing the Krishna consciousness mood. And Krishna within the heart was showing them where the real happiness lies. So later on Prabhupada says that tomorrow when I come in the morning, I'll teach you what all these pictures are. So Prabhupada takes them to everything one by one. And he goes to the 6-armed form of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Sadbhuj form of the Lord. And then Wali asks, who is it? Swamiji replies, this is Lord Chaitanya. Why does he have 6 arms? Because he showed himself to be both Rama and Krishna. These are the arms of Ram and these are the arms of Krishna. Like they understood, but Prabhupada explained and they accepted it. That's it. They didn't have their own way of understanding. It could be like this, it could be like that. Swamiji said it, It has to be right. It has to be true. And this worked in their favor so much. They were able to establish so many centers of Krishna consciousness and preach Krishna consciousness far and wide, simply because they just accepted. Prabhupada said it, it has to be true. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. So then Prabhupada says, what are the other two arms? Or rather, Keith asks, what are the other two arms? Prabhupada says, those are the arms of a sannyasi. And then he went to the other picture. This is also very nice. Who is it? Howard asks. This is Hanuman. Is he a cat? No, Swamiji replied, he's a monkey. So, yeah, another sweet little exchange that they had with Srila Prabhupada. They didn't know anything, completely ignorant of spiritual life, but they completely depended on Prabhupada and his mercy. So here, these were the happy days of summer of 1966. I'll read a couple of exchanges he had with different people during this time. As I was explaining, that Prabhupada left Vrindavan, he left a simple life of enjoyment in Krishna's service, in serving Krishna and chanting in a solitary place and printing his books and things like that. He could have just stayed there in Vrindavan. But he left all of those places simply so that he could go out and save or deliver all these fallen conditioned rascals and fools who are simply suffering in material existence. That Naivoduje Paraduratye Vaitaranyas. That Prahlad Maharaj's mood was that I do not fear actually this material world, because I'm completely absorbed in your pastimes, my dear Lord Nishingadev. But what I am really concerned about is those fools and rascals who are unnecessarily holding the illusory burden upon their head of material sense enjoyment and suffering in that way. I'm worried about those fools and rascals. Prabhupada followed that mood. That let me try and save these people. Because Prabhupada, like we were reading in Bhagavatam this morning, that there are two types of people who are actually happy, the fools and the Paramahamsas. The so-called happiness of the fools, the lowest of the fools, is not really happiness, but because they're so dull-headed, miseries, one miserable condition is no different from another miserable condition for them. It's their so-called happiness. But for the Paramahamsas it's not. They're completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness, completely free and peaceful and happy. Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma. So the Paramahamsa then considers this as an opportunity to go out and preach Krishna consciousness, to deliver even the lowest of fools. And this is Prabhupada. So during this time, Prabhupada invited people to come and live in the storefront. Prabhupada said he would make sure that they would get food, and as long as they chanted and did some service or paid the rent. And many people would come and stay and go and so many different things like that. And many people would come, and the devotees or the boys at the front would then tell them, yeah, Swamiji gives class on this, and whatever little they knew, and in brackets Satsvarup Maharaj writes, they didn't know much anyway. So whatever little they knew, they explained, and the people weren't satisfied. Why don't you go ask the Swami? He's up there. You can just rock up. You can just go up there and he'll speak to you. And so Prabhupada met so many different people. He would speak to so many different people. Although he was engaging the boys in cooking and typing, Prabhupada was not doing anything less himself. Rather, for every sincere soul who came forward to ask for service, 100 came. 100 came who wanted not to serve but to challenge. But they came to challenge. Here are some. Speaking to them, sometimes shouting and pounding his fists, Prabhupada defended Krishna against the Mayavad philosophy. This was also his service to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He had not come to America to retire. He had not come to America to retire. So with the passing of each new day came yet another confirmation that his work and his followers and his challenges would only increase. Prabhupada says that when the envious recognize the presence and the results and the success of the Krishna consciousness movement, then you can understand where we're breaking ground. Because we've done something that we've become such a threat to them. Prabhupada says in one place that if the government knew, or if the Americans or the leaders knew exactly what I was doing, if they if they knew what I was doing, if they knew what I was doing, then they would have killed me. If Jai Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan Ki Jai. If they knew what I was doing, they would have killed me. Anyway, so Prabhupada, he then meets many different people in this place. Let's see if I can get back to this page. Yes, so Prabhupada, he meets different people. Once a young hippie on an LSD trip found his way upstairs and sat opposite the Swami. So this is what Prabhupada had to deal with majority of the time. Right now I am higher than you, he announced. I am God. Prabhupada bowed his head slightly, his palms folded. Please accept my obeisances, he said, then asked God to please leave. Others admitted frankly that they were crazy or haunted by ghosts and sought relief from their mental suffering. So, Prabhupada was there, and anyone who's preached Krishna consciousness, they have experience of this, that when they run the preaching program, that many new people will come to Krishna consciousness. And majority of these people will come and be burning in material existence, they will reveal their mind. And it's mentioned that Prabhupada heard so many things. Prabhupada heard about how people were being conscripted to go to the Vietnam War. He was hearing how people were thinking about abortion, people doing radical things throughout the country. So many weird things Prabhupada had to listen to and pacify. And at the same time give Krishna consciousness to others. Often there were challenges, but under Swami's stare and hard logic, the challenger would usually trail off into thoughtful silence. Is the spiritual knowledge of China advanced? Fantastic question. Prabhupada would sometimes answer by simply making a sour face. Prabhupada wouldn't even dignify the person asking such a silly question. One person asked, well, I am a follower of Vedanta myself. Prabhupada, do you know what Vedanta means? What is the first aphorism of the Vedanta Sutra? Do you know? No, then how can you speak of Vedanta? Vedesha sarver ahameva vedya. Krishna says that he is the goal of Vedanta. So if you're a Vedantist, you must become Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada was very, 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 what's the word? He did not compromise. He was very straightforward, on to the point. He did not beat around the bush. Someone came to challenge, they'd get it back. Straight. What about Buddha? Someone asked Prabhupada. And Prabhupada asked him, do you follow him? And the person said, no. Prabhupada says, no, you just talk. You don't follow. Follow Krishna, follow Christ, follow Buddha, but don't just talk. And then someone asked, this sounds the same as Christianity. How is it any different? Prabhupada says, it is the same, love of God. But who is a Christian? Who follows? The Bible teaches thou shalt not kill. But all over the world Christians are expert in killing. Do you know that? I believe the Christians say that Jesus Christ died for our sins. So why are you sinning? Although Prabhupada was a stranger to America, they were strangers to absolute knowledge. Very, very interesting point. Although he was a stranger to America, they were strangers to absolute knowledge. So what we have is such a great thing. Like you go and meet people on the street that follow really weird groups and cults and things, and they're so proud about the way they do it. But here we are sometimes even scared and afraid to say Hare Krishna on the phone in public, right? But Prabhupada wasn't like that. Prabhupada said, I am a representative of my spiritual master. I am following Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I'm a servant of the servant of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and I'm here to give. Right? Prabhupada in one, later on, in many years later, down the track, well, someone comes to Prabhupada, why have you come to such and such place? I have come here to give that which you have forgotten. So Prabhupada's mood was very, very fixed, that he had the best, and he was not willing to compromise. He was not intimidated by the other person. In fact, he understood the other person's stature and position, that the other person is a conditioned soul and they are in the lowest consciousness, and that he had to give Krishna consciousness the best of his ability to them. Whenever anyone would come to see him, he wouldn't waste time. He talked philosophy, reason and argument. He constantly argued against atheism and impersonalism. Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. He spoke strongly to prove the existence of God and the universality of Krishna consciousness. He talked often and vigorously, day and night, meeting all kinds of questions and philosophies. So here's Prabhupada's walking through fire. Here's Prabhupada's hard, energy. His sweat, blood and tears. It's mentioned that Prabhupada gave himself so much to the people that came to visit him, that when they came and no one was there to question, those who were close or associates of Prabhupada, who came regularly, those boys, they would ask Prabhupada so many questions. What was India like? What is spiritual master like? What was his life like before coming to the West? And Prabhupada would just talk and talk and talk. Prabhupada wouldn't ration out, okay, I have half an hour for you guys, this is all. Prabhupada just gave abundantly by the hour, day after day, as long as there was a real life inquirer. So as long as someone was there. What's not mentioned in the Ever Well-Wisher but mentioned in Lilamrita is that during this period of time, for 2 months, Prabhupada had special private lessons in his room upstairs in the morning time. The devotees would come in at 8 o'clock and Prabhupada would sing Samsara Dhava very softly. They would chant together very softly and Prabhupada would give class. Sometimes the class would go for 1.5, 2 hours and only they would go through 3 or 4 texts, but they would be discussing all the time. And Prabhupada cultivated the devotees in this way. So we're close to 8:30 now, though it's over on dot. There's one thing I wanted to mention before we finish, is that Prabhupada personally cooked and served these people. Prabhupada went out of his way to make sure that they received Krishna consciousness to the best of his ability. It's mentioned that Prabhupada would personally cook, Prabhupada would go and serve, and Prabhupada would clean. These boys, they would just simply come and eat so much till they're full, and just walk out and leave their spiritual master to clean. But Prabhupada did not complain. Prabhupada just continued doing it. Until one day, some of them asked, maybe can we help you? And Prabhupada was saying, I was beginning to think that you'd never ask. So Prabhupada personally did everything. And Prabhupada later on tells his disciple, you just need to open up the center, and you just need to learn how to cook and learn how to distribute and preach, and anyone can open up a center. I have done it personally by example, and anyone else can do it themselves. So Prabhupada, he endeavored so hard to set up this Krishna consciousness movement. He personally did it himself as to set an example. And so it's our duty to read about Srila Prabhupada's activities and his pastimes, so that we'll become enthused to also follow his divine grace's footsteps, and also have more renewed vigor and more renewed love and faith in his divine grace, because then we can understand a bit more about Krishna consciousness in that humble and grateful consciousness. So what I didn't get to is the very interesting point of the first initiation. And the first initiation happened, I believe it's on the first Janmashtami that they the first Janmashtami. One second. It was either Janmashtami or it was actually his Vyas Puja day. Give me 1 second. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. The first initiation. That was also quite funny. A lot of funny thing happens in this pastime as well. How smoke comes and Prabhupada says, close the windows. It's actually purifying. And how he taught them how to do achaman and people didn't know what they were doing. And it's another funny situation, another interesting place. But another interesting thing here to mention is Prabhupada didn't compromise to the extent that he even set up the yagya properly. He personally went and found bricks to set up the yagya. And he could have just set up yagya on the floor, but he did not want to damage the floor, so he put bricks and everything so that it would be fixed properly. So we'll also read a bit more about how Prabhupada was very conscious of what he was doing, and at the same time he was very liberal. He wasn't just on his high horse discriminating, but he was very liberal, but at the same time he used common sense, as he says. He used his Krishna consciousness to preach Krishna consciousness in such a way that it was very efficient. Every ounce of energy was for Krishna's service. Okay, so we'll maybe discuss this next week. So thank you very much for listening. We take the shelter of the soft lotus-like feet of His Divine Grace, of Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada. Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So again, another request and beseech all the devotees paying attention to this seminar, that please forgive me for any offenses or any of shortcomings, but I beg all of you to all kindly come up with some small Vyas Puja offering, some offering on Krishna Janmashtami for Shri Radha Gopinath, and Vyas Puja of Srila Prabhupada, so that we can read them before the Lordships, and more importantly that we can express our loving devotion to both Prabhupada and Shri Radha Gopinath. So thank you very much for listening. Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai, Shri Jagannath Baldev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Shri Gaur Nitai Bhagavan ki jai, Shri Guru Parampara ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaurvani Pacharani Vishesha Srimati Paschat Deshtarane Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Vishnu Bhakti Devi Swamini Pacharani Bhakta Chara Vedanta Prata Vedanta Namaste Namaha